Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday Coffee Meetup. Happy Juneteenth to everyone. We're celebrating with you. I am Christy Connor. I am the host of Friday Coffee Meetup. We are the largest active innovation, entrepreneurial, and tech meetup in Los Angeles, California. Although you are seeing my face right now, there's actually a whole host of people behind the scenes who make this happen, and we are so grateful for them. I'm going to show you their faces so we can say thank you to them. Let me get over to them 1 second here. But they do everything from organizing and setting up our meetups. Oh, lots of little screens are showing up in here. Sorry about this. There we go. So these are them. We are sponsored by Echo Factory. We're grateful for their sponsorship. We have people who help with things like our YouTube channel, logistics. They spend many hours each week, and we are really grateful for all the work that they do to bring this group and facilitate innovation within the Southern California community. We are going to be speaking with Marie Rippen today. And she's also going to be sticking around for open networking at the end. So if you are interested in speaking with her and meeting with some of the others, please stay on the line and join us for that. We are also going to be doing Q&A today after her presentation. The Q&A will happen via the Zoom meeting. So if you're joining us on LinkedIn Live, you're welcome to join the Zoom meeting. The information is in the LinkedIn Live post. From there, we will be taking Q&A via the bottom center Q&A panel. So please put your questions in there. If there are any special acronyms that you're using, please do me a favor and tell me what they are. And I will be aggregating those questions. We hope to get to all of them. If we don't get to all of them, we ask for your patience in advance. We ask that you keep them brief as well. I will put some information in the chat window for you in a minute. Just a little bit more about Friday Coffee Meetup and about Marie. Marie is the COO of Lab Launch, and they provide lab space for biotech entrepreneurs. And she's going to be talking to us today about their experience of going from a nonprofit and doing well to almost going under, and then reemerging as a for-profit company and exceeding what they had ever planned in that transition. So it's a very interesting story. She has a very prestigious background. She has a PhD from USC, right on, in genetic, molecular, and cell biology. And so Marie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. We're looking forward to learning more about Lab Launch.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Christy, and thank you to Evan Sang for inviting me to speak today, and to the entire Innovate Pasadena team. This is really fun what you guys are doing, and looking forward to telling everyone the story of Lab Launch. It's gonna be some stuff that we have never really discussed publicly, just because, you know, it's a little bit like, everyone doesn't necessarily need to know all of the inner workings of the company, especially when the company is under stress. But I'm going to start with pretty much the whole history of Lab Launch. And at the end, I've got an announcement to make that we just settled yesterday, so you guys get to hear it first. So yeah, here we go. Let me share my screen. I'm going to go back and forth a few times between sharing a presentation, so you guys don't get bored staring at pictures or just my face. So here we go. So Lab Launch was founded in 2014 by Dr. Llewellyn Cox, and he had this idea because basically there was a moment when two companies that he was consulting for both told him that they were going to be leaving the LA area to move to San Francisco. And, you know, he's thinking, why on earth would you leave LA? LA is beautiful and has sunshine and it's a wonderful place to live. The Bay Area is foggy and expensive. And I mean, I'm from the Bay Area, so I can say all of this. And when they told him why they were leaving, it was because they couldn't find lab space in the LA area. And, you know, for Llewellyn, this was a big issue because he loves working with startups and he loves living in LA. Why should he have to, you know, pick one? So he looked around and really found that, yeah, it's very true that there was no lab space available in the Los Angeles area. The incubators that existed were in fact full. So he took it upon himself to find lab space. He worked with a local land real estate owner and who was amenable to the idea, who understood the vision, and found this space in Monrovia. And this is the space where we're at now. This is how it started. So this was the warehouse piece of the facility, and this was the pre-existing laboratory that were part of the facility. And so early on, Llewellyn, like literally himself with his hands, turned the space into Lab Launch. So we now have an open shared office space and shared laboratory space. We also have some private labs, but you know, this was Llewellyn like pretty, for the most part, on his own at the beginning. So then at this point in 2015, he was realizing that as the, you know, sole employee of a company and CEO, it was a little bit difficult to both run a company and, you know, from the facility where he was in, and also go out and do, you know, the real job of a CEO, which for sure involved a lot of business development. And, you know, this is pre-pandemic. So, you know, there's no doing this via Zoom. And so basically that was his impetus to put out a job description hiring for a facility director. And in 2015, I was finishing up my PhD at USC. I had become, you know, rather disillusioned with the idea of staying in academia. So I was very eager to find something outside of academia, something interesting, something dealing with people. And I had actually known Llewellyn while he was at USC working for the School of Pharmacy. And at that time, he was, you know, he involved in all of the events that had to do with entrepreneurship. He seemed to know everybody. So I thought, okay, this guy, he's going to introduce me to someone who's going to give me a job someday. So I'm going to keep in touch. So whenever he started talking about Lab Launch, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to all these meetups and see what this is all about. And then, you know, he posted the job description on LinkedIn, and I was like, wow, okay, this sounds like a really cool opportunity and something that I feel like I can make a real contribution to. So I applied and he hired me. So that's how I got involved with Lab Launch early on. And this is, again, while this was a nonprofit organization, I think I skipped that part a little bit, the whole founding Lab Launch as a nonprofit. The concept being that, you know, it's a very mission-driven organization that, you know, the purpose is to keep companies in the LA area, that it's not necessarily okay, we're trying to make a whole bunch of money off of, you know, startup companies. You know, we're trying to charge these companies as little as possible just to break even, so that they are able to stay and so that they're able to graduate from the space. We're not trying to hold these companies here. So then also, again, being a nonprofit, because, you know, a smart business decision is to retain your customers, not necessarily to encourage them to leave. So covering that, get back into the story. So early on, we definitely had some successes, and Lab Launch got pretty busy. come on, I clicked on this slide. Where are we not going? Okay, so Lab Launch got pretty busy. So this is a picture of the lab from, I believe, sometime in the middle of 2016. And, you know, we had a good number of companies. We had companies that were expanding, and it was, you know, still a challenging time to be in the incubator business, because the term incubator, let alone biotech incubator, was really a new concept in Los Angeles. I mean, they, like I said, they existed. There were people doing this way before we were, but the average person did not know what you were talking about. If you said, hey, I run a biotech incubator, you know, they start thinking incubator like the thing you put eggs in for them to hatch. And so trying to explain to people what you're selling, that's a hard place to be in. So we did have these, you know, early successes, but, you know, these companies were doing really well. And as they graduated out of our space, we didn't have the companies, you know, waiting to take up that space that these folks were leaving. So although on the one hand, we were, you know, in large part accomplishing our mission, we were encouraging companies to stay in LA. They stayed, they grew with us, they moved out, they moved to places around the LA area for the large part. I think we had maybe 2 companies that ended up leaving the LA area, you know, but we were really like doing well, but it was not a sustainable way to run the business at that time. At least we didn't think so. So there was a moment there where things were getting a little bit dicey. And it really came to a head in early 2017. So it was getting really difficult because we did have some, you know, fantastic companies graduate, but, you know, they had been companies that were taking private lab space. You know, it was a large part of our revenue that these companies were providing, and, you know, they did well and they left. So in early 2017, it came down to really some conversations that Llewellyn and I had, because we'd been cutting costs in every way that we could think to. And I think of this day as the Monday. That's how it goes in my mind when I think back to it. It was in probably February of 2017. And, you know, the prior week we had been talking about how, you know, then the budget was, and whether or not we were going to, you know, have to skip a payroll or something. And so over that weekend, you know, here I am thinking, okay, this might be the point when it's time to think about, you know, is this company going to make it? Like, really, it was pretty anxious time. And so I'm thinking, man, is it a better idea to maybe, you know, do I stay with the company and try and help it succeed? But then there's, you know, my paycheck is a big chunk of our OpEx. And maybe I actually can help the company survive better if I were to leave, because then they don't have to pay me. Yeah, then I come in on Monday, and I'm kind of preparing myself to make what I feel like is going to, you know, be a really hard decision. And Llewellyn comes up to me and he says, I'm going to step down from the CEO position at Lab Launch, and you are going to take over as CEO. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm, you know, 29 years old. This is still my first job out of graduate school, you know, in complete shock, going, what? Like, Lab Launch is your baby? Like, what? And, you know, he explains his decision-making process. And it was that I had been the one who was in the office, who was in the lab day after day, running the operations of the business, doing the customer service side. He was out doing, you know, the business development side, being the CEO, in the, you know, going out into the community. So it from a running the business side, I could understand it did make some sense because he wouldn't have to like basically relearn what the day-to-day running of Lab Launch was. I could still do that. And also Llewellyn is, you know, I was not particularly concerned about him. He's incredibly resourceful. So I knew he was going to be, you know, fine during that time. And it's not like he was leaving Lab Launch. He was still the president of the board. He still, you know, did a lot of work during the time when I was CEO, a lot of work for Lab Launch. So it wasn't, you know, completely severing ties with the company or anything. But yeah, that was a complete turnaround from what I thought was going to happen that day. And, you know, it definitely took me some time to kind of get used to my new role, really understand what I could do for the business. And then a lot of it was really just running with some things that Llewellyn had already set up ahead of time. So one of them was working with a company that we ended up running a lab space in, and but the only way we were going to be able to do that is, again, here I was, a sole full-time employee in a company that needs someone on site all the time, and I needed to be able to go out into the community. So I had the same issue that Llewellyn had early on. Luckily, one of our board members, actually the mayor of Monrovia, he told us about this program for adults with certain kinds of disabilities, that basically this program provides paid internships for them through local businesses. And he said basically that, you know, sitting at the front desk would be exactly what this kind of internship program is looking for. So it actually worked out really well. We're able to partner with this program to bring in people who just needed some work experience in, you know, a relatively low stress environment. They wanted to learn, they wanted to, you know, interact with people. And so that has been, you know, that was a really, really fantastic way for, you know, me to be able to say, okay, let me train this person to, you know, be able to accept packages, to answer the phone, and then I can feel comfortable going and working with at other sites and working and going to meetings and things like that. So one of these other sites was a space called Toolbox LA in Chatsworth. So here we go. So here's the front of Toolbox LA, and here is the grand opening of Toolbox LA. And so this was something that Llewellyn had set up this partnership previously with the owner of Toolbox LA, because Toolbox was a co-working space, and it focused heavily on tech businesses, tech of all kinds though. So everything from software to hardware. They had a big maker space, and basically Toolbox wanted biotech to be part of that mix. So Llewellyn worked with the owner to help them figure out how to create a lab space within the larger facility. And then basically Lab Launch started you know, operating and managing that space. So then we had the grand opening that Toolbox put together. Mayor Garcetti was involved, as well as Henry Stern, who's a California senator. So that was a pretty fun event. We had one of our member companies show off what they were doing. They're in the cosmetics industry. So that was just a really fantastic event. And it really kind of opened our eyes to the idea that, you know, different facilities, different, you know, other real estate owners saw the value in the idea of having, you know, a biotech incubator, but they didn't necessarily have the expertise to be able to create that all on their own. So that was really our kind of first taste of this. So that really helped out in terms of digging Lab Launch out of the hole that we were in. As well as we did end up getting some new companies that moved in, especially in the summer and fall of 2017. So those were really excellent companies that came in and maybe started with a bench, but they actually ended up growing pretty quickly. So that was really fantastic. And then we got to 2018, we were doing much better. And then I got a phone call from a gentleman named Ken Beal. And he told me that he had this project that he wanted to do. He wanted to build a biotech incubator in Irvine. He wanted it to be accessible to the UC Irvine community because his family had given, actually, I don't think he told me this, but I found it out pretty quickly. His family had given a lot of money to UC Irvine in various capacities. He knew a lot of professors there, and he's a real estate developer. So upon finding out that UC Irvine didn't really have plans to actually build their own biotech incubator, and hearing from all the professors saying what a necessity it was in that area, he basically just decided to take it on himself. That, okay, if no one else is going to build this incubator, then he's going to build it. And so he had, been talking to various, pre-existing biotech incubators and found Lab Launch online and called me up one day. And so, I said, hey, do you want to help us do this? And I said, yes. And I don't think I knew what I was getting myself into. It was a fantastic project to work on, but as you can see, Ken had already identified a potential location. It was this big, beautiful office building in Irvine, in the UCI Research Park, and this is the picture of when it was empty. I think the first time I saw it, it still had the old office, divisions in the space. But this was a project that, was definitely a different, I don't want to say caliber, because that sounds like I'm speaking badly of, maybe Lab Launch Monrovia. I'm not. It's just a different project. Lab Launch Monrovia is, an individual on a lean budget. University Lab Partners is a family foundation on not a lean budget. Certainly not excessive, but, we're talking, orders of magnitude of, higher expenditure for the project. So this was just really a fantastic opportunity for Lab Launch to be able to come in and consult on the project, to consult on everything from, we helped them hire the architecture firm. We recommended BAM Creative. Don't know if any of you guys know them, but they're fantastic. And we consulted on everything from the business model, the design of the space, equipment selection, operational processes. We helped with hiring of their facility director, software selection, market research, and we're still involved with them in a much lesser role, because really I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to University Lab Partners in the news or anything, but they are doing so well. So now we help with content development, and it's just so fantastic to see how successful they've been. So I'll just have the one picture here of what University Lab Partners, the finished product. I mean, I doubt it looks anything like this anymore because they're pretty much full as far as I know. But this was such an incredible opportunity for Lab Launch. And for, honestly for me, I learned so much doing this project. It was a lot of fun, and it really kind of opened our eyes to the idea that, there are other people who want to build incubators. And kind of during the time around when University Lab Partners was opening, which was at the end of 2019, we actually started getting, just out of the blue, requests from real estate developers, other kinds of landlords, landowners who were interested in building biotech incubator space or just biotech space in general. And they wanted to see if Lab Launch could help them. So of course, then, that was the end of 2019. That did not give us very much time to talk about those kinds of projects and negotiate before, the pandemic hit. But it did give us a window into what could be this new market for us. And it also really illustrated the fact that for us to get into that side of the market, we couldn't really do it as a nonprofit. I already described what happened in, early 2017 and, companies coming through and leaving, which was fantastic, but, we didn't have the traditional nonprofit funding sources. We weren't nonprofit grant writers. Neither of us had really the preference to do that. We trying to get donations for a biotech space. Donations work really well for, puppies and children, but not so much for a business incubator. And, we were just looking at this new market opportunity going, this is fantastic, but we just don't have the money to be able to pursue it. We actually would need to be able to raise some investment dollars in order to, just spend the money to, expand the team, to bring Llewellyn back on board, because really he's the one who has the extensive experience in, low-cost lab design, and that's what really people were wanting. And so, we talked to the board of directors, and everyone really agreed that, Lab Launch as a nonprofit didn't make sense to continue. There was no way to grow. There was no way to grow, really. We could sustain ourselves as a nonprofit, but we weren't going to be able to take on anything new. And really, we were seeing the fact that although our early graduate companies were able to stay in Los Angeles, they were able to find space, pretty soon that was unlikely to still be true. So, it was just a decision that we had to make, that really, in order to do the job we wanted to do, which was keep these companies in LA, someone had to provide the space. And granted, there were definitely people who were starting to provide graduation space, but there's definitely still a need for more. And in order to do that, we needed to be able to raise some investment dollars, and that, obviously you can't do as a nonprofit. So Llewellyn and I decided to found a for-profit company. How we did the transition was basically in a lot of conversations with lawyers in order to do this well. But basically, we founded a for-profit company that took over the operations from the nonprofit, took over the lease, essentially started doing the things that the nonprofit had been doing. The nonprofit still exists. The nonprofit will continue to exist, and the board of directors is in the process of deciding exactly how the nonprofit's new mission is going to take shape. We're looking at definitely doing something education related with the nonprofit, and the for-profit basically is taking on the running of the incubator space and talking to these, other like real estate developers and municipalities who are interested in building out incubators and wet labs. So Llewellyn was super successful in raising a small seed fund at that very, early stage of the for-profit, and that, I think, success also, informed us that we were going in the right direction. So that was, late 2019, early 2020. And so we all know what happened, a little bit later in 2020 with the pandemic. So Lab Launch, luckily, was able to stay open throughout the pandemic. We were really fortunate in that way, but interest in lab space declined sharply. All of our potential projects with these other folks outside of Lab Launch, really the discussions came to a halt. Everyone was just kind of hunkering down. But I do want to point out one success story that one of our graduate companies had during this time. So I've got the logos up here so that we can keep everything straight because it's a little bit confusing. So COO of Labs was one of our very first companies at Lab Launch. They started with us in like 2015. They do anti-doping, or they did anti-doping. So they moved out of Lab Launch, actually out to San Dimas, in order to open a CLIA certified lab space so that they could run patient samples like legally and all of that. So then at the beginning of the pandemic, this company, Curative, which some of you might have heard of, they were a startup out of San Francisco, and they contacted Llewellyn because they were looking for CLIA lab space in LA. So Llewellyn connected Curative with Corva Labs. So Curative moved down to LA, moved into Corva Labs space. Corva helped them get everything set up because what they wanted to do was COVID testing. And so the actual test that got approved by the FDA is the Curative-Corva COVID-19 test that got, authorized. It has an EUA. And so basically Corva set up their operations and gave them the space, and it just took off. I mean, at one point Curative had done something along the lines of a quarter of all of the COVID tests in California. So because Curative was growing so fast, they ended up acquiring Corva Labs. So that was basically the first exit of any company from Lab Launch, which was so fantastic. The founders went and bought Teslas and houses, and then also spun out their anti-doping work as Corva Scientific. And they also started a new company called Avrock Laboratories, which is focused on doing NGS testing for COVID and other infectious diseases, so that not only do you know if someone has COVID or not, you also know what variant it is. So there's a lot of benefits of that kind of testing. So that was just a really fantastic story to be able to see, how successful these guys were. And it's also fun because now Curative, they've decided to also get into the NGS testing world, and they moved into the suite next to us in our building. So it just feels very kind of, like the community has come back full circle. So, okay, I just really want to brag about my graduates. So that was really the point of that story. So also throughout the pandemic, like I said, we weren't having a lot of interest in laboratory space, but we did some things like we revamped our website. So this is kind of the front page, and really took a new look at marketing and actually putting money into marketing, because that is definitely something we had not done at the nonprofit. We were not putting any money into our marketing at all. So with the for-profit, we're definitely taking a new focus on that. We worked with a consultant to get the website revamped, worked with a consultant to improve our social media strategy and presence. And that, I think, has had a big benefit, because really since the beginning of the year, we have had much more interest in the lab space here in Monrovia. So I think I was mentioning before the program opened, but we had a company come from UCLA out here to take a look at the lab. We've had companies talk to us from San Francisco who can't find space now in San Francisco. So we've come full circle. We've got the reversal happening, people coming from the Bay Area down to LA. So that's been fantastic, and we've been able to restart our discussions with some of these companies who, had reached out to us with, they've got office space, they've got some kind of real estate that they're interested in turning into biotech space. And of course, since the pandemic and since kind of the massive decrease in utilization of office space, there are definitely more real estate owners who are interested in the concept of transitioning to a type of space that really requires that people be physically present. And so that is certainly biotech. Biotech real estate is one of the only kinds of real estate that's doing really well at this moment. So, kind of the serendipity of having worked with university lab partners and Toolbox, pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic happening and this being the result in terms of real estate. Man, talk about a silver lining for a company. So this was going to be the very end of my talk today, but we actually just signed an agreement yesterday, and therefore I get to tell you guys about it right now, and you guys are really the first that we have announced it to. We are expanding. So Lab Launch is working with Atwater Crossing to open an 11,000 square foot wet lab space in Atwater Village. We're going to have between 800 and 3,500 square foot private laboratory suites. The opening's looking at fall of 2021. So this year, we're getting these ready soon. So the idea is for companies who are graduating out of incubator spaces locally, for companies who really just from the get-go need that larger amount of space, for companies who need very specialized space. And we're just really excited because Atwater is a beautiful location. It's just really a fantastic spot for scale up stage companies, growth stage companies to be able to come and feel like they're in a place where they can make it their own and they can still have the benefit of services through Lab Launch to support them and to be part of a larger community. So with that, I thank you guys so much for inviting me here today. And I think Christy is going to go on to questions now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Congratulations on your new expansion. How exciting. That's wonderful news. Well, okay, everyone, please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A panel at the bottom center of the screen if you're on the Zoom meeting, and we will get started with Q&A. I noticed that the Atwater Crossing, it's arts plus innovation. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Atwater Crossing is already a community type of space where they do cater to various types of groups, including, art type clients, and there's some folks doing different kinds of media work in some of the, not within the building that we're going to be in, well, not within the section of the building we're looking at that we're going to be in, but in the local community. So the real estate owners, they own a whole section of this area. And so it's already somewhat of a cohesive community in that sense. So there's a restaurant, there's a fitness center, and there's some folks who are running early stage companies of various types.
I love that you told the story about collaboration and how one team helped the other, and it's come into this beautiful exit that happened. Can you talk a little bit as well about any other, relationships or collaborations that have happened through your organization?
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite ones to talk about is actually just, it sounds a little strange, but the value of eavesdropping. So Lab Launch is a very open office setting. So, one team is in a little group of desks on one side of the room, another team is, 10 feet away from them. And I remember one company was talking about needing to find a CRO that could reliably produce this particular protein that they needed. And another team really just overheard and said, oh, hey, we work with this group in Germany and they're fantastic. Let me, connect them to you. And, that's, I think, really speaks to the kind of, interaction that's not going to happen without that kind of open atmosphere and people feeling very comfortable to, just talk about, what they need and what they're looking for. So that was a really fantastic one. Another would be actually some of our graduate companies so one of our graduates is Pathways to Stem Cell Science, and they are a nonprofit and they teach kids how to do stem cell research. So it's really fantastic. They have this fantastic program that includes, lecture style learning as well as hands-on work. So these are high school students actually doing stem cell research. And they definitely outgrew our space. So they needed their own space. Also, the director was driving in from Torrance and she had a little kid and it was just, she needed to not drive that far. So she decided to open a space in Torrance, and at the same time, there were another couple of graduates who needed their own space as well. And then another company that was like, it's confusing. They were with Lab Launch for a little bit, and then they moved out, and then they moved some things back in. People needing more space, and so they actually all moved out to Torrance together. So that worked out really well for everybody.
Wonderful. How is the nonprofit related to the for-profit, if at all? You talked about keeping it. What does that look like? You can speak about that a little bit more.
Certainly. So there's no official relationship between the two. So it's not owned by, doesn't own anything at the moment. We're trying to keep it as separate as possible, certainly for legal reasons. And ideally what we want to do is have actually the for-profit do some funding of the nonprofit. So that's really kind of our ideal situation, because we would love for the nonprofit to be able to take on some educational programming that I think would, really kind of frankly distract from the for-profit. But within the nonprofit, I think we can do a lot of good in terms of, there's other fantastic educational programming going on in LA for STEM. But, there's always things that maybe we can do out in Monrovia that aren't happening, on this side of town yet.
What other collaborations do you actively work in? Is it, VCs that you're trying to partner with so they can send their seed companies to you, or tech transfer offices?
So we do partner with one venture capital firm that provides office hours to our companies. And we just started that program recently. So we're looking to open it up to other venture capital firms that are interested in either providing office hours essentially to get deal flow. Certainly we talk to different VCs about, hey, we exist over here. If you have companies that need space, we have space. Tech transfer offices as well. I think for the most part, tech transfer offices in LA, they definitely, are fantastic partners, and they've certainly sent us some companies.
In the shift, into the focus around marketing, what have you found to be most successful?
Most successful. I think consistency in terms of social media, consistency is really big. That's something that I've learned, and as well as I think having just a more polished web presence in general. That's been really great because, essentially everyone gets to the website at some point. So, it's like, it's our first impression, right? So having a more polished website is really beneficial. And then also, you know, in lieu of in-person interactions, actually, you know, just touching base, like networking is still king, regardless of, you know, marketing budget. But networking plus having a more polished website and having that consistent social media presence, those all kind of work together to be able to say, hey, great to see you. We're doing this stuff. Here's a link to, you know, the post on LinkedIn that we have, and also take a look at our website. And those all work together.
Wonderful. It is so important, and I love that you kind of made your first impression so strong. What you were able to stay open during COVID, and what does that look like?
Oh man, we have such fantastic members. Everyone made it so easy on us. I mean, so for us staying open during COVID, it was a combination of, you know, talking to our client companies, because of course, you know, they have their own responsibility to their employees and have already, you know, a lot of them taken steps to do things like staggering their schedules, you know, doing things like, you know, we helped a little bit in terms of making the calendar, you know, more easily accessible for things like our tissue culture room, so we didn't have to have multiple people there in there at once, providing masks, providing you know, hand sanitizer, really just, you know, writing up the policies themselves. But it was, I mean, I can't imagine having a group of people to work with that could have made it easier, because everyone was on top of, they knew what was going on. This was not the first time they had, you know, heard about these new policies that were going to have to go into effect. And also working with a bunch of biologists who can keep a little plate of cells that has no immune system from getting any kind of infection. So we're talking about PPE, and, you know, because it's not just wearing PPE, but it's wearing it correctly. It was so simple. I mean, I do feel like one of the most fortunate people throughout this whole, you know, year and a half of pandemic, because my members were just so easy to work with.
I'm so happy to hear that. Our next question is, do you think your model would be applicable to other fields where hands-on research is important, for example, agri-tech, medical devices, or is there something specific in your biotech structure?
I do think that it is applicable to other fields, and there are actually examples out there. So actually, even University Lab Partners, they do cater somewhat to medical device. Really, the central thing is, for any field that needs the same kind of space. So that might mean, you know, in our case, so we have, you know, we have different biosafety levels that are designated in different areas. So companies that need like biosafety level 2. So for another kind of company, they might need, you know, access to a clean room space. And another company like ag tech, I'm imagining, I know nothing about ag tech, so I'm imagining greenhouses. So really companies that you can kind of group together that need just a corner of the same overall kind of space and that can utilize the same shared equipment. So I think that's one reason why medical device incubators, in terms of like facility-based incubators, haven't taken off quite so fast as biotech, is because in medical device, you might need, you know, 2 different high-end 3D printers that are similar but different. So you need both, and they each cost like $1.5 million. And luckily in biotech, you don't necessarily need that level of specificity in your shared equipment. You need a PCR machine is a PCR machine is a PCR machine, pretty much. So it's a lot easier, I think, to share equipment. So those are really the things it's based off of, the kind of space and the kind of shared equipment that you need, and how broadly applicable is that.
All right. And you have this collegial work environment. Do you have any non-disclosure agreements or confidentiality agreements between your participants in each lab?
We do not. That's definitely a question that we get asked a lot of the time. If a lot of the times, if a company comes in for a tour and they bring their lawyer, the lawyer gets very skeptical. So this is not an uncommon question. However, with biotech, and well, let me start first with entrepreneurs in general. Everyone's working on their own company because they think their thing is the coolest thing since sliced bread, and you're not going to convince them that anyone else's invention is better. So there's that aspect of it, and then there's also the aspect of, in biotech, especially when we're talking about, you know, molecular biology, cell biology, it would be really, really difficult to actually steal anything from anyone, because even if you have like the physical tube, try and decipher what's written on that. I mean, really, like, that's hard. And then you have to go back and get the person's notes, which in general, are written in essentially a code, because no one has the time to like write things out in full so that a stranger could understand. It's really, really not practical to steal. So for those reasons, and because frankly, like, we want to be able to have open discussions with people. I don't want to have to remember what is someone's secret and what's not. So it's basically everyone's responsibility to, you know, keep anything that's actually confidential to just, you know, okay, don't talk about it.
What you talked about the community a bit. What are you doing as kind of the leadership of this organization to build that community? Is it like, do you have events for the teams or networking? How do you build that community amongst them?
So here at Lab Launch, honestly, one of the biggest ways, we haven't unfortunately been able to do it very well during the pandemic, but you know, we'll have different kinds of little celebrations just within our own community. You know, sometimes we used to do if maybe a new company was coming in, or if it was someone's last day, we would have, you know, lunch. We've been able to, you know, buy everybody lunch a couple of times, but ordinarily we'll have, you know, lunch and learn events. We'll have, we're going to hopefully soon restart our safety meetings, and those sound, you know, a little bit less like just fun, but you know, those are actually really good opportunities for community building as well. But also, it's just a nice space where people are comfortable, you know, chatting with each other. And so it's funny because it's not so much, I think, about the events that we do and the policies, but more about the people that we do bring in to Lab Launch. That's really part of our interview process, is we're interviewing to find people who not only are, you know, running interesting businesses and starting interesting companies, but also that are going to add to the community. So, you know, no jerks, that's all.
No jerks. Well, we're going to wrap up our Q&A, but did any of these questions bring up anything else that you would love to share with our community?
Oh, if I go into more, I'm going to end up just bragging about all of the companies that we've ever worked with. I mean, that's just, I think, the best thing about running this kind of company is the fact that we get to meet so many folks who are doing interesting work, and, you know, see how they grow, and, you know, hopefully continue to be able to brag about our graduates for a long time.
That's wonderful. And we do have open networking after this. So if you are on the line, stay on the line until after we finish the LinkedIn Live, and you'll get to ask more questions, and we'll get to hear some more stories from Marie Rippen about some of the amazing companies that she's worked with. Thank you, Marie, so much for being here with us today. Great to hear about Lab Launch. We wish you continued success. We're excited for your expansion and can't wait to hear more about that. Please join us on July 2nd for our next Friday Coffee Meetup. We're going to be hearing from Jessica Corbin on the entrepreneur's path to resilience and how sometimes obstacles can help that. With that, everyone, stay safe and well. Have a great weekend ahead. And for you on the line here on the Zoom meeting, just hold on for a minute and we will get you moved over. Thank you so much, everyone.